So delighted to be hosting today. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm located on the traditional ancestral unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people who have been in these areas for thousands of years. And I'd also like to acknowledge that you're joining us from different places, near and far, and we acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. So, as I said, our guest speaker today is very, very special indeed. We're honored to have I practice this, Kweli Kwelkal, who is Chancellor Stephen Point, as our guest speaker today. But before I introduce the Chancellor, I want to just run over some housekeeping notes for those of you that have attended our hot lunch before. Firstly, if you have any technical or logistical questions, please use the chat option so that Jenny and or Stacy can help. And our format today, we have no breakout rooms in order to give as much access to the Chancellor to attendees. Following his remarks, I'll hand over to Professor Henry Yu, Principal of St. John's College, who will moderate the questions for the Chancellor. Some of the questions we received in advance of the lunch, so thank you to people who submitted questions, but also you'll have an opportunity to post questions on Slido. And so just for those that are not used to Slido, you just open your browser on your phone or other iPad or whatever and enter Slido, www.slido.com, and there's the slide. This event is 42821. That's the number you enter to join the conversation, or you can use the Q code. And then if you put in a question, you can also look at other people's questions and upvote. So you can decide, oh yeah, that's a question I'd really like to ask. So it's a really super easy tool to use. And as I said, it bumps sort of the questions that it prioritizes questions. So, and we may not get to the Slido questions. We will do our best. It just depends on how our timing goes. But if you feel that there's a question that the Chancellor, you'd really like to ask the Chancellor, by all means, put it in Slido. And now I'd like to get to introduce you to the Chancellor. So the Chancellor is the senior statesperson of the university and serves as the ceremonial head of the university, presiding over all major ceremonies. He's an ex officio member of the Board of Governors, both Senates, as well as the Council of Senates. Chancellor Point brings a wealth of experience to this role. Firstly, he's a double alumnus of UBC, and since he got his Bachelor of Laws in 1985, he's retained close ties with UBC. In addition to serving as the 28th Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia from 2007 to 2012, his career has included practicing as a lawyer, working at the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, serving as a provincial court judge, and as Chief Commissioner of the British Columbia Treaty Commission. He also chaired the advisory committee that worked to implement the recommendations from the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry. Chancellor Point is a member of the Stokale First Nation and has advocated for Indigenous people throughout his career, pressing for greater recognition of their contributions and their fuller involvement in all aspects of life in BC. Appointed as the 19th Chancellor, but the first Indigenous Chancellor of UBC last July, the Chancellor will now share his experiences during this first year, which of course, as we all know, has been an extraordinary one. And he'll talk about the nature of his role at the university. Chancellor Point. Sorry, you're muted, Chancellor.
Yes, there we go. Thank you to the organizers of this event for asking me to participate. Whenever I come onto the university campus, it just feels like a homecoming for me. I love the campus. It feels like the air is cleaner or something. I enjoy being there and coming back to participate as the 19th Chancellor at the university has been a great honor for me. When they called me and asked me if I would consider that, I said, of course, I'd be happy to help out. Not knowing, of course, what you're getting into, right? It's not until you get into the role that you realize, that I realize how big of an institution UBC is, how many levels of governance there are, and how expensive an organization like this really costs. It's very, very complex. University of British Columbia, of course, has a wonderful international reputation. It's one of the top 10 universities, I think, in the world. And it's like we've got this great reputation for science and for all kinds of other accolades, too lengthy to repeat. But it's great to be affiliated with the university, and I enjoy coming in at a time as well when the Indigenous populations have Indigenous student population is just at an all-time high. There's so many students now coming from all over Canada to either participate and get an education at UBC in Vancouver and also at the university in Okanagan. When I was here back in 1971, there was only 12 of us, 12 Indigenous students out of the 27,000 students attending university. So I think Joan Archibald was one of my colleagues back then, and Bill Wilson. And so we got to know some of the people coming in, but it was a pretty lonely place when you're coming from a very small insular community like Scout Hill First Nation to come to Vancouver and get into school away from home and all that. So it was, I'm really pleased to see that there's so many students, First Nation students now at UBC. My role at the university, as has already been mentioned, is ceremonial. That means that I don't speak politically for the university. The president does that, thank heavens. I've been asked to speak at some events that are highly political, and I get to say, no, you have to talk to the president about that. And with the COVID situation that we find ourselves in, of course, lots of things, and meetings included, are being done virtually now. So it hasn't been that onerous in terms of having to travel and come to meetings and whatnot. I simply come downstairs, put my sweater on, and I'm at a meeting. I'm getting used to that. Whereas in days gone by, while I used to teach at the University of British Columbia in the law faculty, I have to get up in the middle of the night and drive down to UBC, and so it's a great relief anyway during the COVID. Although it's been a difficult time for all of us, one of the positive things is that we've had to stay home and do our meetings through Zoom, and I'm really enjoying that. I think that's terrific. I've got a ceremony coming up. They sent me home with my regalia now, so I just have to turn on the TV and put my gown on, and I'm at whatever event is coming up. And there's actually no end that you can get involved if you want to as a chancellor. I mean, you're a member of all these committees, good heavens. But thankfully, I think as previous chancellors have sort of set the trail, they don't expect you at all these meetings, but you certainly can go as chancellor. And I plan on attending some of the meetings just to get a better idea of how things are run, like the Senate. And but I've attended board meetings, and I'm sitting on the Indigenous committee dealing with indigenization with the president. And I was asked to chair the a smaller committee dealing with the residential schools center run by Dr. Tapel Lafon. So I kind of draw on the line there because I do work full time as well at my job here at Stollenhaven. And I work with the treaty process, and I'm helping with the treaty process. And I also sit on a few boards in Vancouver. So I keep getting calls to get involved. I've got to start learning how to say no because my time gets eaten up so badly. But anyway, I'm enjoying my role at UBC. I look forward to actually going up to the Okanagan when the COVID situation changes a little bit, and getting to meet the elders and students up there. And so I was involved in the selection of the honorary degree recipients. It's an interesting process. Wow, and some of the people that are being recognized, it's just amazing. So it's really been an eye-opener for me, and a little bit of a steep curve, but so far I'm staying above water. Haven't sunk yet. That's good. But I'll leave it there. I don't know. You must have questions, I guess. I don't know how long we have, but I'm pleased to answer any questions if you have.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chancellor. Yeah, no, that's great. I did, as someone who has worked very closely in my role in ceremonies, I've worked with previous chancellors, and I can speak to the demands on your time. Yeah, you're sort of buffered at the moment in a way, as you said, with COVID. The expectations are perhaps slightly less because, but I do know the demands on your time, and they will increase, of course, because everybody wants the Chancellor at their event. You're the ceremonial head of the, so yeah, so, so while we look forward to getting back to regular events and activities at the university, yes, the demands, you are going to have to figure out a way to politely say no to certain ones, but that'll come. But I think it's great that you're getting this insight now into what's happening at the university, and it's and others were on the ground, having to hit the ground running, literally, in person. So anyway, we appreciate that, and also your perspective from the fact that you were only 12 students. First Nation students here when you first start. That's a real eye-opener, and thankfully we have moved and we've made great strides forward. We're still making them. We still need to do better, but we're definitely making great strides. So we do have some questions for you. So I'm going to hand over now, as this is your first visit, albeit virtual, to St. John's College. We thought it would be nice for the principal of the college and one of our committee members, Dr. Henry Yu, to provide a welcome to you, and then he'll moderate the questions for you. And again, for the lunch attendees, remember, you can also upload any questions you might have to Slido, and just www.slido. It's in the chat what the event code is. It's 42821. And Henry, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Eilish, and welcome, Chancellor Point, to this virtual hot lunch. And I know that for many, please feel free to eat if this is your lunch hour or the only time in the day that you're able to get something to eat. Chancellor Point and I before were grabbing something to eat, because the nature of Zoom is, you don't have time to actually go and have lunch often. You're just on the computer all day. So just a little background for those of you. I know many of you have been at Hot Lunch before. Hot Lunch began 8 years ago. There was a committee. Eilish was on there, Shirley Nakata, Andrew Parr's on the committee, Stacey Barber of St. John's. So a group of staff and others who really felt that, and sorry, Jenny Liu is also here today from that committee, that people were working through the day like they are now, and not even eating, or eating out of a takeout or leftover container, and maybe sometimes missing lunch. And so the idea was once a month, we would have a hot lunch together at St. John's College, which is an international graduate college that was founded in 1997 by alumni of St. John's University in Shanghai in China. And they had very generously founded St. John's College here to welcome the world. We have 165 graduate students from 45 different countries, all dining together, breakfast and dinner. And our motto is the world around our table. And the idea was that in sharing food, we could talk about many issues, sometimes difficult, frank, topics. But because we were sharing a meal and that we would have to see each other next meal, that it would create a moderation and also a way of respecting each other while talking over food. And that has really been the ethic that also shaped Hot Lunch right from the beginning 8 years ago. Another rationale for this, you could say, other than eating a nice warm meal, is that our chef can make food. Chef Saifu is from Singapore, and he can make all kinds of food. And the ethic is that everyone from all around the world should feel at home, one night, and maybe feel a little less at home all the other nights as they try different, home cooked meals that people from India will feel comfortable one night, but the rest of the time, they got to try each other's food as well as learn about each other's cultures. And so that coming together over food is the ethic that we welcome you to with this hot lunch, even though it's virtual. That is what we stand for at St. John's. And we really do hope that in speaking here, you follow a long line of presidents, vice presidents, executives, as well as key people around the campus who are leading the university into the future. And part of this was to have this venue so that a lot of our staff could hear personally who these people were who were playing key roles, and to engage with them, ask them questions, hear what they had to say, and hopefully give a chance to those people to meet the staff of UBC as well, who congregate once a month at Hot Lunch. So we look forward to welcoming you physically, hopefully sooner rather than later, to St. John's, and hopefully a Hot Lunch in person, so you can again share in food together with us. But for now, this is we're very thankful and grateful that you've come to this virtual lunch to share with the staff. So I'm going to pass on some, as I said, there was a great interest in your speaking, and so we have some questions already lined up, and I see that people are already beginning to send things up to Slido. But maybe we'll start with a question. When you are alumni, you've had much connection over the years, but when you think about UBC, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? If you could encapsulate it in one thing.
Peace. When I come onto the campus and you're driving in past the golf course, I begin to relax. It seems like, Vancouver is a very busy international place, and it can be pretty impersonal as well, But when you come up to the campus and you're studying, you're working there, you're in this large community of people, and people are walking around, and they're in the village, and if you talk to people, they go, "Yeah, hi, how are you?" It's like you're almost in a different country, and I've always enjoyed coming back to the campus. I used to have a bike, and I'd ride around the campus, and I didn't need to do anything else except just to ride around. It was like, that's great recreation, that's great fun, and I remember when I was in having trouble with my math class. I was having trouble studying because the math was so over my head, really. But I went down to the student union building to listen to a guitar player, and I found I could get work done there by listening to someone else play. And I could sit in the cafeteria and listen and work on my problems. And I was just relaxed. It's a peaceful place to be, and yeah, I'm thinking very seriously about moving back to the university just while I'm the chancellor, to stay there and to soak up the environment. Yeah, it's nice.
Well, we'd welcome you in an instant. You can stay at St. John's as well. So we'll give you our best room if you want to come back, and you can stay here while on campus. So that's an open invitation. It's interesting how many people have said they missed campus, even though they're able to work from home and it's convenient, and the commute, they don't have to commute. But yeah, so I think a lot of people resonate, or what you said will resonate with them. So thank you for that. Very personal sharing. We have an Indigenous strategic plan that is hopefully going to take us into the future. It's been well consulted. It's committed at every level. We had a question from the staff: is what can we do as staff to support and prioritize meaningful reconciliation at UBC and beyond? So, what kind of particular roles that do you see that the staff can play in fulfilling our strategic goals?
Yeah. Well, when I first began talking with groups about reconciliation, when the commission came out and Mary Sinclair was going across the country, a lot of organizations began holding conference space available to talk about what is reconciliation. They wanted to know, what do we mean by that? And so I started to talk about reconciliation from the English word. It means, in the banking sense, to reconcile your bank balance, so you understand how your money has been spent. People in a marriage situation, they reconcile after a breakup. They reconcile their differences, and they come back together, and they try to work things out and to make peace amongst themselves. And in a large sense, that's what reconciliation really means. Indigenous people for a long time have been marginalized to the edge of society. They're the poorest members of a very wealthy community called Canada. They live on large number of status Indians live on property that doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the federal government. And the litany of history in terms of the relationship has been pretty bleak for Indigenous people. And so this idea of reconciliation has been kind of viewed between governments and governments, or large groups of First Nations and institutions. And the university, of course, coming up with its own reconciliation plan. And what often isn't, I think, mentioned is that reconciliation actually begins with you. It begins with the way you understand Indigenous people. I remember being on a radio station at CBC one time, and they were interviewing me about the history of Indigenous people. And an elderly lady got onto the line, and she said, you Indians, you should feel lucky because we don't have any discrimination in Canada. And I said, what? And the guy looked at me, and he says, and then she said, we could have killed you guys, but we didn't, and I'm going, whoa, this is, and she hung up, and then the fellow that was interviewing, his face was all red, and he apologized. And I get home, and my daughter was crying, and she said, I got a phone call that some guy said that, the Indians should be lucky that we didn't kill them all. And it's like, there's a real severe gap between historic realities and what people's impressions are of history, right? And every time I've spoken to Rotary clubs, to police officers, to probation officers, to judges, you name it, these large groups, at the end, most of them come to me and say, you know, I didn't know this history. I didn't know this is what happened. It's not what we're told, right? And what's being told is passed down from word of mouth to word of mouth. And when they're actually confronted with what the history is, many people will say, that's not true. You're lying. You're just making it up, you know? And even when I taught the perspectives course, students would challenge me and saying, you're just, this isn't, how do you know this is true, you know? And reconciliation is not as much an institutional issue. I know that there's institutional racism, but reconciliation begins with you as an individual. How do you feel when you see someone of a different color, Black person or an Indian person? How do you feel in your heart? What is your understanding? What do you think is going on here? Like those nurses that were talking about the level of intoxication and operating on the assumption that natives are a tax burden and that their care is being paid for by Canadians. All of these things, these assumptions. I remember speaking at a school one time in grade 11 class, and I talked to them about the history of our relations. And the teacher, who was a history teacher, apparently came with me to the teacher's lounge, and she said to me, you know, my grandfather came here after the Second World War. He was German, and everybody hated Germans, and he didn't speak English. But now he owns a big farm in Yarrow, and he has all this land, and he's a very wealthy, successful man. She said, what's wrong with you Indians? I looked at her, and I didn't know what to say. I was kind of stumped, and I went, wow, how do you even begin to address that kind of ignorance, that kind of false assumptions? And so reconciliation really begins with you. What is your understanding? And then I think, you know, as individuals, I mean, Canada is not an institution. It's Canada is a country of people. The university is not a building. It's made up of people, individual people. And if changes in the institution can have any effect, it's the individuals that have to change. You have to change in your mind and in your heart. And I know that that's a challenge. A lot of people who supported the president, the last president, they're averse to change in the United States. But we have to change. We all have to change. We have to, we can't afford to pass on these misinterpretations and conflicts to generations in the future. Otherwise, we'll end up like some countries today. They're in perpetual conflict over the past. And I'd like to, it would be great if the whole country was like coming onto UBC. You know, anyway, maybe I'm a dreamer, I guess.
Well, that's a dream that I think is inspiring to a lot of people. I mean, as a historian myself, that's my role as I teach history here. It's always been remarkable to me that we think that education is about learning, but it's also about unlearning. It's about unlearning many of those things that you mentioned that people believe and they think that that's our history, but it's not actually our history. And it's that kind of task of that I think you're calling all of us to unlearn what we think is true in order to actually move forward. Is I take it very, very deeply as a historian myself, and caring about the future as a product of that past. So thank you so much for those words, Chancellor Point. You know, that was, I think, as individuals, and you know, you're telling and sharing what you think we can do as individuals. How about as as an institution? You know, as I said, we have a strategic plan, that's the institutions. But what is your vision on how we can, you know, and I think these terms, not everybody perhaps will like the terms or use them, but indigenize and decolonize UBC, I think is something that was asked, and academia, perhaps even beyond UBC. And are there any kind of immediate as well as long term, but what are some immediate things that could be done institutionally that allows us to implement perhaps some of these changes sooner rather than later as Chancellor of the institution?
Well, there's so many things that Europeans have brought here, right? One is this notion that there's this theoretical person called a reasonable man, someone that's educated, owns property, and is fair-minded, right? We send people to school in order for them to become this person, a productive European. That's it. Yet they wonder why this school ethic fails in the North when education to them has no sense or value to living off the land. Indigenous people haven't done well in a system that, I mean, if this university was producing widgets, right? Indians have no use for widgets. It's producing an education that's relevant to European culture, European capitalism, European ethos. What education is relevant to Indian people, Native people? I mean, it's the education that their elders gave them, thousands of years of living off the land, medicines, and how to rear your children, how to live together in harmony with one another, how to deal with conflict resolution. Everything is so much different. What they think indigenization means is helping Indigenous people feel comfortable, but on the road to becoming good Europeans, right? It's like, oh, I don't think that's reconciliation. I think reconciliation for an institution like UBC, we have to stop and ask ourselves, what are we doing here? What is it that we're trying to produce? What's the end product? You know, and how can that be relevant, become relevant to Indigenous people? One of the things they always say is successful people they have a job and a house and, you know, children, this idea of Dick and Jane kind of idea, except in the modern context. Well, it's not what we define as success, right? Indigenous people have to start coming forward too, to help change the way universities look at their relationship to the land and to the people. We're running out of time as a society. Pretty soon the fossil fuels are going to be gone, just like the trees, just like the fish, just like everything else that Europeans have come and utilized. And all of this is disappearing. And yet you ask people, what are we doing about it? Oh, somebody's doing something, the government's doing something, blah, blah, blah. But when the last tree falls, when the last fish is caught, when the last cup of drinking water is gone, that's when people are going to say, gee, we should do something, you know? We should have did something. What did we do, you know? We have to change the way we fundamentally think in relation to water, relation to air, relation to animals. And society, no matter how you look at it, individuals in society are shaped by what universities do. You learn your place, who you are, through education. Universities are producing people that are going to continue to exploit the natural resources that our world has. I'm not in favor of that. Right? I'm in favor of a university that's thinking about the long-term problem, sustainability. How do we deal with the fact that we haven't been treating the resources very well? How do we encourage other governments to stop that craziness out there with the pollution and the plastics in the ocean? Maybe we need to find a way of turning plastic back into oil. I don't know. Somebody said they hadn't figured it out. But institutions like this, you know, we've got to start thinking much longer term. We have a term in our language that's tomyuk. We make decisions for the 7th generation. So the elders, when they're sitting there thinking what to do, they're thinking about that 7 generations down. It seemed to me that when I was watching the discussion on the world production of oil, I think that in 35 years we're going to run out. Who's thinking about our resources? Who's thinking about saving them, preserving them? We're all thinking about electric cars now. We'll have to because we're going to run out of oil. It's going to be too costly to bring food into the north by truck. It's going to be too costly to raise the 4 large agricultural companies that grow food for us. It's going to be too expensive for them in 35 years because they do burn fossil fuel. My God. When it all runs out, it's too late to think about it. But yeah, I think that the institutions needs to begin to look at how traditional people view their relationship to the land. That's reconciliation, you know. Indigenous people, they've been around a long time, but the assumption that Europeans made when they first seen them, these are primitive people, uncivilized, they need to be Christianized, they need to be educated. And if we're going to talk about reconciliation, change the way we look, maybe we ought to ask ourselves, how come when we arrived as Europeans, this place was a paradise and it ain't anymore?
Well, you've said you're a dreamer, but that's that kind of sense of hope that you're giving us as a vision and a dream. That's not just 7 generations, but that's something that actually, I think a lot of people would agree that that's something we need to implement. Maybe that's a good segue to one of the questions that's been voted up. So 17 of you have voted up Andrew Parr's question of, thanks for joining us today, Chancellor Point. If you could help UBC accomplish one big, audacious goal during your time as Chancellor, what would that goal be?
Find your soul. One of the jobs that the elders had for you when you're young, they put you through a fast. In the fast, you had to have a vision of who you were going to become, what you're going to do when you became old enough. And then the elders would help you accomplish that, because we believe that you were born many times, and that you come back to this world to do something specifically. Institutions have to find their soul. What do they stand for? One of the greatest questions that was ever asked of me in school is a teacher says, well, who are you? And I've heard a lot of answers to that over the years. One of them is we are what we stand up and fight for, who we stand up for, right? We are what we will defend. Of course, in the First and Second World War, we defended the right to be free from despotism. Canada found its soul fighting and dying, millions of our Canadians dying in that war. Institutions like UBC, we need to find our soul. What do we stand for? That's a vision statement. You know, this is what we stand for. You can't serve two masters. It's not possible. You can't ride two horses. You have to ride one of them. It would be a great thing. UBC sat down and wrote a vision statement, what we stand for, what will we defend. I know that they are saying that in the indigenization process, that elimination of racism, that's good. We don't want that. What do we want then? Right? What do we stand for? What a monumental thing that would be. You know, you go to Europe and places like China, culture is very, very old. Confucius played a tremendous role in shaping Chinese philosophy. China's been there 5,000 years. Canada's been here, what, 100 and some years as a country? We barely have a soul as a country, right? We barely have a history yet. We've only been as a country since 1867. I remember they phoned me up, they wanted Canadians to take part in a cultural festival in Europe. So they sent me and my family. We went over, and then I got there and I said to my wife, who would they have sent if they weren't going to send the Indians? And that's a problem that the melting pot has, right? They have no culture. And it's not Tim Hortons, it's not hockey. Well, I guess it's part of it. But we need to find our soul. And that'll take a long time, I think. Long time.
I think a lot of our young people, like, you know, I teach students obviously every year as a professor, and I think your answer would be very inspiring to them, because I think they're searching as youth, and perhaps we haven't played that role of an elder, you know, giving advice about why are you here, why are you taking 5 classes and, you know, staying up late at night in order to you know, I think it is a question that every single one of our students would like to know for themselves, but also for that the institution could help them in being here. So I really do appreciate that very deep, well thought answer for our students and our staff and faculty too. We have another question that from Brian Jones. Thank you, Chancellor, for spending time with us today. What is the best piece of advice you have ever received? I'm sure that's a tough one, and also the best advice you have given. So that's a pretty tough question, I think, but we'll see.
That's the best advice I've ever gotten and given is the same advice. And when I first heard it from, what's his name? He's a doctor, Evan Adams, and he was speaking, and I'm listening, and he said that his dad had told him this: "Get over yourself." I even hear it in this other movie too, that this guru says to her student, "It's not about you. It's not about you." And that's great advice. It's great advice. We're not here very long, you know. We're not immortals. We're only here for less than 100 years. And if you spend that time staring in a mirror thinking that it's about you, you've spent a wasted life. It's about others. It's about something else. And that's the best advice I've ever got. Well, we teach our children wrong this way. You know, we take pictures of them, we tell them to goo goo and gaga, and we give them everything they want, and we make them the center of our attention. Then when they grow up, we tell them, sit down and shut up. Right? I mean, we don't teach them how to get over themselves, to get out of the center of the circle, not being self-centered. And the egoist running the United States recently was a prime example of why you don't want to go that way. You know, the ego is not a very good master, a good teacher, not a good master. And it was the very best advice I'd ever gotten. Anyway.
Thank you, Chancellor Point. And I think you also, in some sense, answered what a meaningful life is, to be able to find that that meaning outside of yourself, that and serving the needs of the broader whole. We have a question from Jocelyn Beretta. Hi, Chancellor Point. If we were gathering in person for an actual hot lunch today, what would be on your dream menu? Or who has your most memorable meal been with? So either or both of those. And I hope our chef is going to be listening right now, because when you return in person, we're gonna be taking notes on this. So what's your dream meal if we were all gathered in person?
I tell you, when I was the Lieutenant Governor, I was really worried that Indigenous people weren't going to accept this, because I was representing the very person that's taken almost everything from us, right? The crown. And I got out to a community in the West Coast, and I went there, and they had signs out there, just so happy that I came, and they were welcoming me. And I was sitting there with them having a meal. And I noticed one of the elders, I said, they brought you a big barbecued fish head. She said, oh yeah. She said, oh, the elders get that. I said, oh, you're lucky. Before you knew it, they had brought me a big fish head. And I also had that big piece of salmon. But that was the greatest meal I ever had, was a barbecue fish head. That's a good meal. Yeah, so yeah, I hope that we can get together soon and share a meal together. When you gather to share a meal, it's our protocol to eat food. It's because we're sharing not just the food, we're sharing each other's attention, our energy. And that's how I get to know you, by sharing energy with you. And then when I see you again, I remember, oh yeah, we had a good time sharing. And it makes it easier for us to get along, get along with one another, eat together, feast together. Yeah.
So I think, Henry, we've got time for one more quick question. I think there's one more on the Slido there, the last one, yeah.
Sure, I will grab the next upvoted one. And by the way, just as a segue to that really echoes with the traditions of my own people and ancestors. That in fact, if we were together, a gift that we often give to our honored guests is a bowl, so that they can take that home, but know that they can always come back and share a meal with us. So again, in anticipation of that barbecued fish head for when you return to St. John's with all of us, we'll try to make it a big enough bowl that you can fit the leftovers from the fish head in there. We'll get a big salmon. So as a kind of last question, thank you, Chancellor. If you could tell your 20-year-old self anything at all, what would it be?
Often people say that, if I knew then what I know now, right? Well, there's an old story about a man walking down the street, and there's a big hole in the street, and every day he falls into it. And he finally got to talk to one of the elders. Said, every day I fall into this hole in the street. And the elder said to him, take a different way. My advice to my 28, take a different way. Quit fighting the holes in the ground and making the same mistakes over and over again. Find a different path up the mountain.
That's a perfect way to, I think, end this amazing hot lunch with you. I'm so personally grateful, and on behalf of St. John's College, on behalf of the Hot Lunch Committee, for your wisdom, for your generosity in sharing that wisdom with us. And some of us are a little older than 20, but we probably could still use that advice about take a different way and to take a different path. So thank you, Chancellor Point. I'll pass it back to Eilish, but really our deepest gratitude for your taking the time to spend it with us today. And again, we'll share a meal next time, and do it the right way. Thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you, Henry, for your hosting there and your moderating, and yeah, we do feel very fortunate, Mr. Chancellor, to be part, to have you here. I've made lots of notes from what you were saying. It's just, you know, thinking so, the seventh generation, thinking so forward is just a really, it's such a great way to position our minds and thinking about that. And love the idea of the vision statement, I have to say, and so many things you said. We have recorded this, and I know that people will really appreciate listening to your what you've shared with us today. And I know staff are very excited and inspired to have such a leader, a strong leader as yourself in the position of Chancellor. And we really look forward to, you've only started your 3-year term, and we look forward to learning much more from you during. And of course, as Henry said, yes, we particularly look forward to, you know, seeing you perhaps in person. Like everybody, what you said about getting dressed and getting in front of the Zoom, it's great. You know, you throw on something and you get in front of Zoom. So it has great benefits that you don't have to get out and drive and go to work, and you're right here. But we do miss that personal contact. So everybody's looking forward to being able to do that in the future. I do want to mention your installation, because I know our ceremonies team, my colleagues at ceremonies were largely involved in your installation. And for those staff that haven't seen it, we'll put up a link to the installation ceremony. It was, as somebody who's witnessed many of them, because of course of COVID, it was very unique, but it was just such a lovely ceremony. And it was just really warm and personal, and it was wonderful. And then the other link we'll put up is the the new regalia that you're sporting.
Yes.
Because of course that's a huge change for UBC, and some of the staff may not know the work that went into that with Musqueam and Silks, and the conversation we had, and with input from yourself and the president. And we now have a beautiful new regalia for you, which is, you know, indigenized in that way. And it's a lovely blend of the two, you know, sort of the old regalia and a new one. So we were thrilled to be able to do that in time, particularly when you were announced as Chancellor. So it's fortunate to work on that project. And as I said, the ceremonies team really did a huge, a lot of work on that with you. So we've shared the links. Thank you again for being with us today. Thank you to Henry for moderating, to the committee for their support, to the team, Jenny and Stacey, for organizing us today. And the next lunch will be May the 26th with Robin Ciceri, Vice President of External Relations. We look forward to seeing you all back at that point. And in the meantime, stay safe. Thank you. Bye now.